Alright. So I know I'm a bit late to the party with this video. The game has been out 3 months already? And I'm pretty sure even the badgers in my garden have decided where they stand on the game. The opinionated little cunt. Regardless of this, I'm making this video for 2 reasons. Firstly, because this game has eaten so much of my time since it came out, it would be weeks before I could make a video of anything else. And secondly, because fuck you, I do what I want. Being an avid player of League of Legends, I of course hate myself, and get enjoyment from the kind of experiences that can only be achieved in the real world by getting the James Bond testicular tickle treatment. Well, luckily for me and my ballsack, FromSoft have been hard at work for the last few years making Masochism Simulator 2022. Before I get into the details of the game, it would be amiss of me not to at least touch on the performance issues it had at launch. I've spent many years being very vocal to my friends regarding my issues with game companies releasing their games in a broken and buggy state.
So, Mel, what's your honest opinion on Ubisoft?
Oh, please don't get him started.
Oh, no, it's pretty simple, really. They're all wankers.
Mel, whose arm is that?
Yeah, I guess you really would want me to shed light on the situation. Hey? 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 I get it. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, Barry. And just because I've enjoyed FromSoft's previous works, doesn't mean they get a pass for this. Although personally, the issues at launch were very minor for me, manifesting as some slight stuttering and 2 to 3 second freezes when the game was loading new areas. It probably could have been a lot worse, and it was a lot worse for some people. I mean, my PC is worth a worrying amount more money than my car is, and frankly, I was still getting sub 60 frames a second in many areas. God knows what the peasants had to deal with.
Who's that then? I don't know. Must be a king. Why? He hasn't got shit all over him.
Luckily, with a few patches, from what I can tell, the issues are, at least for the majority, fixed. Well, that's not to say there aren't still complaints in regard to performance. The frame rate has an unchangeable 60 FPS cap, for reasons I can only imagine must relate to them continuing to have their physics and animations tied to the frame rate, like they did in their older games. And as you can imagine, the decision to have a 60 FPS lock did not go down well with the PC community, who all decided to collectively throw the dummy out of the pram and review bomb the shit out of the game, proving once again that PC gamers are definitely not, on average, elitist crybaby wank stains. And I should know, I'm one of them. Sure, the frame cap wasn't the only issue these smooth-brained intellectuals were bitching about. Another large complaint seemed to be the lack of ultra-wide support, which is pretty confusing if you ask me, because as someone who himself has spent a stupid amount of money on an ultra-wide monitor, I did so with the knowledge that not every game was going to support the resolution, and even the ones that do often seem to forget that the UI is also supposed to scale up, so I end up playing most games in 1440p anyway. And it's not like the game is incapable of running at an ultra-wide resolution. A few loading glitches I've had have shown that the black scaling bars on each side are a UI element, meaning that the lack of ultra-wide support was an active choice by FromSoft, not one made out of laziness. Sure, you have the right to be a little bit disappointed, but to actively review bomb the game just because you can't play in ultra-wide at 144Hz seems like it's less about the game and more that you're annoyed that you wasted money on a monitor with all the real-world use of a sandpaper dildo.
Oh, softball! Those are rare!
Jesus, I've been waiting months to have that rant. Shit's better than therapy. A good rant just hits different, you know? Like a cold beer after a long day, or a danger wank in a McDonald's bathroom. What? Don't look at me like that. I can't always be bothered to queue up for a go on your mum. While I'll be the first to admit that some of the assets used in this game are, let's just say, a tad wonky, saying this game is anything short of beautiful should be considered a greater sin than blazing the fucking Erd tree. Sure, some of the game areas are supposed to be ugly, but somehow that doesn't stop them being absolutely gorgeous. The map for this game is massive, and each area of it has a fairly unique visual theme that makes it very distinguishable from the rest. The stretching grasslands of Limsgrave and the Weeping Peninsula, the tightly packed streets of Landau, probably saying that wrong, the scorched wastes of Caelid, and well, this. Seriously, the first time I entered the Sophia Riverwell, I'm pretty sure I came in my pants. And I mean, a game hasn't managed that since a much younger Melt discovered the strip clubs in GTA. You see, every part of this map is utterly beautiful in its own way, except, this. This can fuck off. Of course, having a map this large means sweet fuck all if it's devoid of content. And so, to ensure you didn't get bored, FromSoft has sprinkled in lots of dungeons, caves, and mines to explore. like a fucking lot. When a game studio wants to have this many explorable areas and it doesn't like going bankrupt, corners had to be cut. And boy, did they cut some pretty fucking noticeable corners. Mostly with the use of modular assets, or as I like to call it, Lego bricking. What I'm referring to is just the practice of building a bunch of smaller assets that are designed to fit together, so they can be arranged later in different ways to make unique layouts without having to make unique assets for each area. This is very common practice for most studios and honestly a requirement when you're making a game of this size. It does, however, come with two pretty obvious issues. Firstly, that you often end up with these odd looking dead ends everywhere, and secondly, that if you don't make enough bricks, shit starts looking very repetitive very quickly. Don't get me wrong, some level of repetition is guaranteed in a game of this style, but the repetition I'm going to be focusing on is so blatantly obvious and unnecessary that if these areas didn't have some of the most important upgrade materials, I don't think I'd ever go there just to avoid the fucking aggravation it causes me. You see, I'm talking about the mines, and for a perfect example of what I mean, you don't have to go any further than the entrance. You see, the developers only made one elevator shaft. One! Only giving us one shaft is the most Mormon move you could have pulled, FromSoft. I grew up in the internet era. If there's not at least two shafts involved, I ain't fucking interested. I promise you, this is the exact same elevator shaft every time. The jump down route is always on the left hand side, and it's always in the exact same place. Hell, by the fourth mine, I stopped checking if the ledge was there, and started blindingly throwing myself off the cliff like a recently divorced lemming. It doesn't get a whole lot better once you get past the shaft either. A good majority of the rooms are reused, so much so that you haven't got a hope in hell of knowing which mine you're in. Even the enemy placements are near identical, which is just fucking laziness. If you're going to make a game of this scale, FromSoft, you either need more variety in the building blocks you're using, or less fucking mines. Since we're already on the subject of repetition, we should probably touch on the game's second largest source of it. Saying there's a lot of boss encounters in this game would be a mild fucking understatement. As I'm writing this script, there's at least 236 encounters that have been found. And while this is nothing short of fucking impressive, if not a tad daunting, the amount of boss encounters and the required level of exploration to find many of them means that you're more often than not going to end up heavily out-leveling most of the fights, to the point that they're incredibly trivial. I mean, I'm pretty certain FromSoft weren't expecting people to actually do all of the boss encounters. Not that that's fucking stopping me from trying. You'll notice I keep saying boss encounters and not bosses, because much like the Lego brick issue from earlier, FromSoft has not made enough of them. Some of the bosses are just larger or identical versions of normal enemy types, often from later in the game, and even more often with no changes to their attack patterns. Sure, I understand the argument could be made that killing a big version of Twat makes killing a smaller version of Twat later on much easier, and sort of functions as an indirect reward for exploration. Unless, of course, it's the Crucible Knight, in which case you're just fucked. It cannot just be me. I'm pretty sure these bosses just function as filler and nothing more. Which, I mean, I'm not really mad about it, I still enjoyed the fights, and I'm more than willing to forgive something so simple. I will not, however, forgive the multiple appearances of particular bosses as boss fights. Sure, there are some changes between the fights, all of them minor, like the addition of a different enemy type or just fucking two of them for some reason. Sometimes these minor changes are enough to make me forgive the secondary appearance. For instance, I thought the Scarlet Rot Erdtree was an interesting enough change in difficulty to justify fighting it again. Even if that change was just that now it hulks hepatitis loogies at you every 5 minutes. Still, having to balance this status effect through the fight made it a tad more interesting. Of course, that certainly doesn't excuse the many other appearances of the Erdtree avatar. But fuck it, those in glass houses shouldn't get stoned, and I've been using the same Photoshop file for every video I've ever made. This joke was written before my girlfriend drew the new face. It did work a lot better then. Yeah, I know I'm as surprised as you that she hasn't killed me yet. My real issue is some of these minor changes are far from enough to justify fighting these fucking bosses again. I mean, I swear to Cthulhu wearing a tutu if I see one more boss reappear, but this time it's got magic daggers. I'm going to use a magic dagger to castrate whoever's fucking idea this was. What an utterly bottom of the brain cell barrel idea. Just give it some magic daggers. Fuck you. It's like going to a store and having someone try to sell me the same toaster I already own, but this new one has Wi-Fi so the Chinese Communist Party can closely monitor my fucking gluten intake. Why would I want that? And it's actually worse than that, because I didn't know the toaster was in the store until I passed the mist gate, and now I'm stuck inside and can't get out without taking the toaster or leaving my fucking wallet. Even with that being said, my least favourite bosses in the game are somehow still the NPC invaders that are scattered throughout the map. Not because the fights are particularly bad at first, but more because they're sporting the kind of intelligence that can be outmatched by anyone who's never thought finger blasting a plug socket would give them superpowers.
No, I don't want to talk about it.
I haven't got a huge amount to say about the combat in this game. For the most part, it's just the same as the other Souls games, difficult and extremely rewarding. I would say that if you're not using the summoning mechanic, that this game is in fact harder than the others, due in large part to the increased complexity of the boss AI and attack patterns. In fact, this game killed me so many times that it got bored of bending me over a barrel and decided to murk my processor instead.
Hey, this one to all my dead homies, you know what I'm saying?
Regardless, there are a few differences I should mention, because although there aren't many, they are exceptionally good at making my two remaining brain cells bounce off each other like a game of dopamine pong. A pretty interesting addition to this game is your horse Torrent, a necessary addition in regards to mobility, due to the extremely large scale of the game world, but also an interesting addition in terms of combat. Initially, I wasn't that big of a fan of his horseback combat. The timings of the attacks felt too delayed, and the controls often left me getting stuck on groups of enemies, which quickly resulted in getting dismounted faster than Joe Biden riding a bicycle. And, much like eating an undercooked prawn curry at an Indian takeaway, this first experience put me off using it until I had no other choice. The no other choice in this case wasn't the only other takeaway in a 10-mile radius burning down, although oddly it did involve a lot of fire. I'm speaking, of course, about the first dragon boss in the game, Agheel. You see, it didn't take me long to realise that with bosses like Agheel, horseback combat is practically a requirement. Luckily, being forced into using Torrent's combat system under these circumstances, it got me very quickly used to how he controls. It wasn't long after that my brain did the equivalent of a mental pop shove it, and now quite frankly, I can't sing higher praises for his inclusion as a combat mechanic. I mean, sure, it takes some getting used to, and it is fucking far from perfect, but Torrent is an invaluable tool for thinning out groups of enemies and outrunning AoE attacks. Just, don't make the mistake of thinking that his double jump will save you from full damage. Larry! Although past FromSoft games have featured many of these in one form or another, I want to touch on the status effects in the game. And this time round we've got everything from hepatitis to HIV, although quite rightly, the average player would probably consider them all AIDS. Now, while most of your experience with these status effects will be having them applied to you by enemies, and you can also inflict these on enemies yourself by changing your weapon affinities, or just finding one that already does it. And while
This is brilliant, but I like this.
hemorrhage can be applied by weapons, throwing daggers, weapon arts, and spells. It builds up on enemies the same way it does on you, and once you hit an enemy's hidden resistance level, it does percentage health damage. Percentage health damage. The more health the enemy has, the more damage this shit does. This makes it an excellent, if not borderline broken stat to build your character around. You see, although I was using dual katanas for a while, both of which do stack bleed, I didn't really discover the effectiveness of hemorrhage until I was about 70 hours into the game, because once you find the black wet blade, you can make any weapon proc bleed and scale with arcane. So I gave it a shot on some twin blades and oh boy! You know what, actually, this gives me an idea. I'm not sure if I'm alone here, but fuck the auto-locking system in this game. Sure, it works most of the time, but it always decides to start fucking up at the worst possible moments. Like if you're running away from an enemy and try to lock on, it will just sometimes ignore their existence for no apparent reason, and recenter your camera to where your character is facing, which happens to be the wrong fucking direction. And since I have the camera rotation speed quite low for more accurate movement when unlocked, you could boil the kettle, make a sandwich, pop to the shops, play the stock market, perform a hostile takeover of Twitter, pay off the deep state, run for president, increase weapons spending,
Invade Europe, become world leader,
plummet the human race into chaos.
And die of old age with your 14 wives and 12 sissy waifus crying at your bedside in the time it takes me to turn the fucking camera back around. Fucking nailed it. A fairly common complaint I saw around this game's launch was that it had little to no story, which simply isn't true. The story is great, it's just not handed to you on a silver platter of cutscenes and exposition dumps. I can understand that for those among us that prefer a more passive narrative experience, FromSoft's approach to storytelling is probably not your cup of tea. Much of the story is hidden behind optional dialogues, item descriptions, and contextual world clues, which requires a certain amount of effort, attention, and exploration to uncover properly. I mean, there are barely any cutscenes in the game, and most of them are reserved for boss fights. If you have the tendency to skip dialogue with the expectation of being able to keep up to speed on the story, you could probably make it to the end of the game without really knowing what's going on or why. FromSoft have taken to using the interactive nature of the medium to immerse the player into the game by making them search for and find answers within the world itself. And, of course, you could always just watch a lore summary video if you can't be asked. Hell, I was paying attention and I still had to watch a few. Not because I didn't get all the info I needed from the game, but because I have the memory of a sieve and, well, have you seen my other videos? I was a little bit distracted while playing.
Yeah, I killed the child soldiers. Big whoop. Want to fight about it?
Questing in this game follows a similar pattern of complaint to the story, which is no real surprise considering how heavily linked these two parts of the game are. The open-ended nature of the questing system is both a breath of fresh air and admittedly pretty annoying at times. There's a fair amount of NPCs in the game, and short of marking all of their locations yourself when you meet them, you're guaranteed to forget about meeting half of them. Oh wow, would you look at that? They patched in automatic marking locations. Guess now the only thing you're forgetting is what they asked you to do. I may have just presented that as a negative, but it's really not. The lack of a quest log forces you to pay more attention to the game and the interactions you're having within it. NPCs aren't often spouting nonsense at you, they're asking you to help them, and it's on you to remember. A good example of the questing in this game would be the first possible quest and interaction with Blade. If you walk through this area at night, you can hear howling coming from a nearby tower, but you can't get to it. If you then happen to travel back to this church nearby and talk to the merchant there, he now has a speech option where you can ask him about the howling, which causes him to teach you a taunt. Head back to the tower at night, use this taunt when you can hear the howling, and down comes, oh my god, he's a good boy, look at him, he's so cute, oh! Sorry about that. Sorry. At no point was I given any direction on this. I just happened to go back to that trader to buy something a little while after hearing the howling, and I saw the speech option. Do you know how fucking cool this all felt? And you can skip this by accident if you start Ranni's questline before you go here. Hell, you can skip most smaller parts of questlines by accidentaling into a later part of it. I skipped meeting Blade at the Riverwell by walking to this castle in Caelid and fighting
Better act right.
Also, quick tangent, but how cute is it that this dude loved riding his horse so much that when he started to grow in power and therefore size, he learned gravity magic just so he could still ride his horse without crushing it. What a kind and gentle soul. I'm not going to act like this game is for everyone. It's really not. It's difficult, frustrating, at times it can be a little bit tedious. But much like with their past games, FromSoft have managed to make something that offers a level of satisfaction that very few other games can come close to matching, inside one of, if not the best designed open worlds to date. The feeling of progression in your skill as a player is noticeable throughout this game. Sure, sometimes you might be underleveled for a boss area, but you always know in your soul that if you get good enough, levels don't matter. When you've been throwing yourself at a wall for hours, finally overcoming it is about as close a feeling as you can legally get. Fuck. FromSoft have done away with the mimic chest from previous Souls games, something I have no complaints about, as I'd rather not have to face the in-game counterpart of my sleep paralysis demon. There are, however, still trap chests, these being transporter chests. And while there are multiple transporter chests in the game and they all send you to different areas, the first one I found very early in the game is definitely the worst of them. I'm in a shithole, surrounded by a bunch of depressed looking old men, and half of the people here are carrying knives. Oh fuck, I'm in Manchester.